All right, thank you all for joining the FSLogix Planning, Implementing, and Optimizing Office 365 for Virtual Desktops. With me today, I am very lucky to have our CEO and one of our co-founders, Kevin Goodman, joining us, and we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do in our environments to help ensure um, that we have a fully optimized environment for Office 365. A little on Kevin's history, and I'll let him brag on his own self, but he has done many startups. He's written a couple books, spent a lot of time in the desktop end-user computing space, and is fairly well known within the industry. Kevin, is there anything to that you would like to add?
Yeah, Dave, can you put the presentation into presentation mode?
Yes, I can always do that. Let me hit the play button. There we go. Technology getting the best of us sometimes.
Yeah, so it's you and me, and it's just like old times. For folks that don't know, Dave and I worked in the Fed space at a very large virtual machineware manufacturer for several days, so several years. So it's good to be back with you. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about Dave Young. So he is the product manager here for this product, and he has guided it to what it's looking like. And if you are going to be doing Office 365 on some type of hosted desktop or virtual desktop, Dave probably knows the problems you're going to have even before you have them. So we're really glad to talk to you this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you're coming from. And give me a second, I'll tell you a little bit about FSLogix as well. So as Dave said, I'm the co-founder. We've been around since 2013. We shipped our first product in 2014. And you can see our choice customer list there. We have over 100 customers and over 100,000 seats. And we're proud partners with Citrix and Microsoft and VMware. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you we won the glass at Synergy in 2015 for desktop and application virtualization. But it wasn't just Citrix that has given us some lauding. We also have some industry luminaries that, and you can see them here, Rory Mon and Frake and Andrew Morgan have all said very, very nice things about us. But one of the quotes I want to point out is by our friend the AdSense bigot, James Rankin, who said until now deploying Office 365 on Citrix was impossible without a big performance hit. That impossibility lies in the fact that Office 365 requires an OST file. Most of you may know that, so they want Exchange in a cached Exchange mode. And Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you, but you basically can't do that using folder redirection.
Yeah, this is a folder redirection was something that we started heavily using within the VDI space and the XenApp space to try to make the impact on the virtual infrastructure a lot less. I remember when I was at that big company with you, and one of the things that we always struggled with was from an IT perspective, right? It was great to have a non-persistent desktop, but from a user perspective, it was not great. And I can throw a lot of adjectives at it, but none of which would be good with the FCC, so we'll just leave those alone. So as we started to look at this, we started to implement folder redirection. And the problem with folder redirection is as you start to build this, and especially when you start looking at OSTs, an OST is a live database, and as OST does things like extents, right? And when we do an extent, all other transactions on that device are paused, right? So that one extent can happen. That's not a big deal if it's one person, right? It becomes a big deal if it's a couple hundred or 1,000 or a couple 100,000, right? And that starts to put a lot of load on that device that is providing those profiles. And if I'm the first user in, if my company starts working at 8 o'clock and I come in at 7:55, hey, performance is great for Dave, right? But when Kevin comes in, because he's been in meetings and he logs in with the rest of the crowd, all of a sudden we're getting all these stop signs. It's like driving to work in traffic, right? Doesn't matter if you got a Maserati on the highway. If you're stuck in traffic, you're stuck in traffic. And you're waiting for the person in front of you to finish up doing what they need to do so that you can then get to the point where you need to do what you need to do. So as we start to look at folder redirection, it becomes a pain point. There was a guy out there, and I'm not going to mention any names, but if you want to Google it, it's kind of fun. I have 100 problems in my IT infrastructure, and 99 of them are related to folder redirection. And folder redirection was a great cure in our initial mindset, but it caused us a lot of pain down the road. And we're going to talk about what some of those pain points are, but I just wanted to make sure, folder redirection ultimately is the issue. Now, Microsoft will say that, hey, they support OSTs on folder redirection, and there's a big asterisk there with a subnote and paragraphs of writing after that, right, which says, yeah, we support it, okay, if it's a light user with less than 3 months worth of mail. So I asked the question, what's a light user? Is the 400 emails a day that Dave Young gets a light user? Or is it the 1,000 emails a day that our CMO gets that's a light user? Or is it the 1,800 emails a day that our CEO gets? What classifies as a light user? And that's a huge caveat that none of us can really put. Will Microsoft come out and say if you receive 10 mails a day and you retain that for 30 days or 90 days, they'll support it. They've put this ambiguous number there, and that ambiguous number is because it varies, right? They can't put hey, if you do exactly this, it's going to work well. So we've got that, we support it with a note, right, which actually says not really supported in my mind. So there's got to be some way that we can do this, and we're going to talk about that way. We're going to cover planning and design first. And Kevin, you want to kind of kick this off for us?
Yeah, so actually what I want to do is I want you to go through these things. I'm taking so when we're doing Office 365, as a former guy who ran all this stuff, how would you worry about I/O? I mean, that should be on the top of your list. What would you do about that?
So it is on the top of my list. I can either throw hardware at it. We can buy 100,000 IOPS for about 100 grand, right? It's $1 an IOP, I guess. And if I throw hardware at it, my scaling on that is going to be limited to how much hardware I can throw at it. And as we think about what's going on with that OST, every time we read through it, if we index it, et cetera, that impacts my I/O. The ultimate thing I would do is say, hey, let's move it local so I don't have to go across the wire to do that. But when we start talking about that in VDI, that's just a hit that's going to happen on our virtualization stack, right? So we don't want to do that. So as we start to think about I/O, we need to think about different ways to read very large files. And the only way that I can really think of it is, hey, if I can do block level reading on that so I can get directly to the data and I don't have to read a 5 gig or 50 gig OST file to get to the data, then that is going to impact my I/O. And if I remember correctly, we've got a couple things that help us with that, right, Kevin?
Yeah, so let's dig into that a little bit right here before we get off of I/O. So what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that folder redirection doesn't do block level? Is that
That is
right?
correct. And when we look at it from that perspective, the other day I was preparing for a presentation, and I've got this presentation. We'll talk a little bit about it later, but it's 108 meg. It's got some video in it. And as I was preparing for that, I went on to one of our virtual machines in our lab. And, we keep our virtual machines fairly small. We use them for purpose things. And I was just going to use one of these machines to do a quick demo. And I went out to OneDrive and grabbed my presentation, pulled 108 meg down. Not a big deal, right? But I got this alert that said I was out of disk space. I was like, why am I out of disk space? I was accessing that from OneDrive. And then, the light bulb went off. Oh, yeah, Dave, duh, right? And I started looking, and in my iNet cache was 108 meg PPT, right? Not named what it was supposed to be named, but it was 108 meg. So I was like, yeah, duh. So I got one copy of it there. And then when I went to save it to the network, because I wanted to launch it from a network to show the next point. It created another copy locally, right? And then when I did actually launch it from the network, it created a third copy in my cache, right? So you see this 108 meg file is moving about throughout the network. Not a big deal when it's just one user. It becomes a big deal when we talk about hundreds or thousands of users because the file server has to take time to serve that up. So we can change that.
Yeah.
In the
Hey,
auth
imagine
level
if yeah,
is great.
imagine if that was my OST file, which is 50 gig. I'm sorry, I've
Well,
never
Kevin, you get a
deleted
lot more
anything
email
ever.
than I do. I can't have a
I've
50
never
gig
deleted
email.
anything ever. Yeah. Imagine if it was 50 gig though. That would even one guy's going to start putting pressure on your network. What you really want to do, right, is just read data back and forth, not the whole darn file.
Well, and there's another thing that impacts that I/O, and we haven't even begun to discuss that. But one of my favorite questions to ask our VP of Sales, just to make sure he gets the importance of what we're doing, is, "Hey, Andy, I want you to find that email I sent to you 91 days ago, and you can't use search." And Andy always chuckles. He's like, "Can't be done, Dave. I got too many emails." And the point being is, if we conduct search across the network, it gets even worse, right? Because now we're going through and we're reading the file over and over and over again. And a lot of times we see that one of the impacts to reduce I/O is disable search. And in the words of my good friend Helge Klein, that's BS, right? If we start disabling search, now the user's experience is not on par with what they had before. And we've got some cool things that we do around that, correct, Kevin?
That is correct. And one of the things that Microsoft talked about still having 95 million PCs out there, upgrading to Windows 10. One of the things to move them over to XenApp is to get them the same experience. Single sign-on would go a long way towards that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I remember some bad years in my life working on single sign-on. We had probably 900 different levels of authentication for apps in an agency I worked for. And when we finally got single sign-on done, we were so happy, right? Well, I don't know if I'd want to be the guy to go back to, the CIO and say, "Yeah, great, glad you bought Office 365. And all that single sign-on we did, we're going to now have two sign-ons. You're going to have your one internal company sign-on, and then you got to have this sign-on to entitle your Office 365 every time you land on an RDSH server or VDI box, right?" So when we start to think about that, that becomes a major pain point in end-user productivity, right? Because we want to have those non-persistent desktops. And we have come up with a cure for that single sign-on where we can basically cache your entitlement and allow you to take it from session to session so that that end user doesn't have to do that re-entitlement every time they land back on the infrastructure.
So I'm looking at these next three bullets: OST size, CPU impact, network impact. In a way, we've talked about all of them, but why don't you take them one at a time and talk about how, without FSLogix, these are all severely impacted based on how big your OST is. But with FSLogix, they've been minimalized.
Yep. So when I first started doing some of the testing to validate what we were doing, I had a virtual machine, I had a test account with mail in it, and the OST was 1 gig. And one of the things that we consistently saw, based on coming through a fairly large internet pipe, was it took about 12 minutes to fully download that OST. Okay, and that download of that OST was actually CPU cycles happening on that virtual machine. And on average, we saw them about 30%. Okay, so when you think about those CPU cycles, and VDI CPU cycles are king, right? The less we use, the better off we are, which means we can, up our density and get more users on that infrastructure. So every time you download that OST, we're getting a 30% hit for 12 minutes. So you guys do the math, if you've got hundreds of users, what does that cost you in CPU cycles? And we saw the same thing on the network, right? We'd see this huge spike on the network of traffic being pulled down. And if you think about the cost of bandwidth, for internet, that's expensive, right? Or if we're going across WAN links and we have to have, no longer do you have to have, you've got to have dual T3s or whatever it may change your infrastructure to. Those are all things that impact our planning, right? And it goes back to architecture 101, right? When we all started moving things into the data center, right? Apps from the user's desktop into the data center, we noticed there was problems, right? Pulling that stuff across the WAN didn't always work very well or was very, very costly. And hence, that's kind of where Citrix came from, was making WAN users able to get into the data center so that they could be closer to the data. And we see the same impact happening with Office 365. Now it's coming from the hub versus the spokes, but as we start to do that, it's going to be significant on our overall plan on how much CPU we need, how much memory we need, how much I/O we need, and how much network we need. So all things that are going to impact us. And then the next one, silos, right, Kevin? You remember the complex silos we all deployed out in our XenApp arenas, even in our VDI arenas, right?
Yeah, over in those pre-FSLogix days. So, one of the huge benefits that corporations are seeing is they can retire their Exchange servers when they move to Office 365. That's a big undertaking, and I am not sure I would want to do a cutover one day on Exchange, next day on one day on Exchange in 2013, next day on 2016 of Office, and going to Office 365. So one of the issues you may run into is you need both Office 2016 and 2013, or 2010, 2007, up and running at the same time. Well, one of the things that we can help with is FSLogix, and we'll go into the app section on here and how we can help, is we allow you to run all of those in the same image. You don't need separate silos. And who wants to create a brand new silo, Dave, right before they knock it down? So it doesn't make sense. Create all these silos for Office 365 so you can have a hybrid situation. And then as soon as you get on to 2016, then drop that other silo. It doesn't make
Yeah,
sense.
we used to call that the rolling upgrade pattern, where we would deploy a new app onto a new silo and then decommission the old silo. But it seems like we never got to decommission the old silo. I used to joke when I was operational supporting a large data center that decommissioning was always phase two, right? Well, phase two never happened, right? We were stuck supporting those silos. At the bank I was at, we had probably one of the most complex environments, because you get that app, even if there's 5 or 10 or 500 users left on it and 95% had moved on, you still got to maintain that silo for legacy reasons. So we have some cool stuff that allows us to do that. Let me cover a couple of the items on how we can help, right? We have profile containers, and we have our Office 365 container. I'm going to go over the profile container first, and what that allows us to do is to basically take everything from CUsers percent username, your local profile, throw it into a VHD, and connect the user to it instantaneously on login. Now, the benefit of that is we get to transfer technologies that we're using. So pulling files from a file server, I like to call them fetch and retrieve, right? I go out, I get the file, I retrieve it, and I do something with it, and then I fetch it back, right? That is very costly. Overall, it is a very costly process. And I don't think anybody on this call would argue with you and I, Kevin, if we make this bold statement. Local disk access is always faster than network disk access, because I don't have to fetch and retrieve, right? When I go local, what I do is I just read blocks, right? So wouldn't it be wonderful if we were able to do that all local, but have it saved out in the network? And what we allow is that we intercept the folder, CUsers percent username, and create a junction point to that, which allows us to then encapsulate all the data within a VHD. So when, the instance of that 108 meg PowerPoint, instead of reading all 108 meg, we read just enough to launch a PowerPoint up and put slide 1 up. And then when I click on slide 2, we read some more blocks and we launch slide 2. And then when I hit slide 3, we read some more blocks and I launch slide 3. So it allows us to get rid of that folder redirection, which is fetch and retrieve. right? And you'll see a huge increase in your user logins. We generally see customers that are a minute plus go down to sub 20 seconds. Now, there's a lot of things I can promise you, but I can't promise you 100% just off a whim that I can get you to 10-second logins, because there's a lot of environmental factors. I had one customer, we showed him how to get to sub 10-second logins, but he had things that he had to leave for legacy things. They were very happy to go from a minute 40 down to 30 seconds. And I think when you think about the math on that, that's huge. I kind of, being selfish in this business and knowing we can take them to sub 10 seconds, would love to get them over the hump to sub 10 seconds, but there's a lot of things we have to do for their specific environmentals. So profile containers allows us to run that data in a VHD with like local disk reads across the network. Okay, really, really cool what it'll do to your logins. If you've got a login problem, give us a try. It'll definitely make life better. Building on that technology, we introduced the ability to just do Office 365. So instead of doing the whole profile, we can actually grab, C %username slash app data slash local slash Microsoft and specific folders within there, which allows us to just capture the Office 365 problem. And part of the reason we did that is there's a lot of companies out there that have invested a lot of money into things they're doing, and they don't want to just rip and replace it all, right? So we, in our brainstorming, said, let's do something to specifically help with the Office 365 problem. And out of that Office 365 problem came some cool technology from FSLogix, right? One of which is now I can just grab the OST folder, right? The other is we are able to now do stuff around OneDrive, right? So being able to do stuff around OneDrive, it's mail first, but then when it comes time to saving data and retrieving data from OneDrive, that's going to be the next thing that people start wanting, right? And then doing things around Skype for Business and caching the entitlement, et cetera, gives us the ability to provide that Office 365 solution. So it gives you a very low cost point fix to that particular problem, so you don't have to tell the CIO that just finished signing the PO, yeah, we're not going to be able to do that. So it gives you a very specific fix for that particular problem. And then we'll let Kevin talk a little bit about base image management.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Dave. So just to wrap up what you said, though, to be very clear, so if I have a third-party UEM solution that depends on folder redirection to get its work done, and all I want to do is Office 365, your Office 365 container from FSLogix is going to layer right on top of that existing UEM solution, whether it be UPM from Citrix or the built-in one from VMware or a third-party one, and just give them Office 365 support. That's correct?
Yep, absolutely. And I like to equate this to throwing flash disk in front of an old storage device. It just makes it better, right? Or putting a turbocharger in your car. Just makes it goes faster, right? Doesn't change the engine that you have, doesn't change the car that you have. We don't change the storage that you have or the UEM provider that you have. We just make them faster by switching out at one level the technology that's being utilized to access that OST folder.
Well, man, that's pretty cool. So I'll tell you, the unified base image management that I'm going to talk, it dovetails pretty nice with that as well. We already gave you one use case. That's if you want to have Office 2013, 2010, and 2016 all in the, without doing application silos. You can do that with FSLogix. We can show you with some best practices how to put that or any other two apps together that normally would need isolation into the same image, and then based on their Active Directory group membership, probably security groups you already have built, when they log in, they only see the application they're entitled to. And it's simple to manage via Active Directory. If I just got training on 2016, take me out of the 2010 directory security group, and put me into the 2016 security group. Next time I log in, voila, I'll have the new software right there. So we have been working with customers since 2013 to completely eliminate their silo farms. This also can take the place of application virtualization. When you have an app that you're currently getting sequenced or packaging, especially if you're paying a third-party company for it, it can get expensive. FSLogix can reduce your need on those. Just put them in the base image and filter them as needed. That increases your session density.
You know, Kevin, you talk about the cost of application virtualization. Prior to me joining that big hypervisor company, I was doing a lot of consulting. And one of the things I did server consolidation consulting, but I also VDI consulting. And I love VDI consulting. And the reason I loved it was my server consolidation consulting was usually, you know, it might be 6 to 8 months worth of work. Usually they wanted you to come in, help them get started so that they could then take it over. The VDI consulting was usually 6 to 18 plus months because it took forever to get moved over. And part of that was the application piece of it. And I remember this conversation specifically with a big credit card company, and they said, "Hey, you know, we got 7,000 apps. How long do you think it will take you to get those all virtualized?" And I said, "Well, you know, if everything goes perfectly, we'll do it on average of 4 hours per app." Okay. And they specifically asked me, and I'm going to date myself, is that with Thinstall or with Softricity? I said, it doesn't matter. It's 4 hours per app. Either one, whichever direction you decide to go. And they said, 4,000, or excuse me, 7,000 times 4 hours. That's 28,000 man hours. And Dave, how much is it that we pay you? And I said, well, you know, it's about $1.75 on discount. And, you know, in my mind, cha-ching was happening, right? But then I got the next thing is, yeah, we don't think we're going to do that. That just doesn't make the ROI to us. And the problem was it was complicated, right? Now, I know a lot of guys that were really good with it, but when you look at an organization that's got 7,000 apps or variations of apps, it just didn't make the ROI. And the beautiful thing about what we do is we're native, right? We install just like you would normally, no fancy packaging and stuff like that. You create your hide rules and you're done. And I would venture to say we're less than a half hour per app on average. I've seen some as quick as 2 minutes. I've seen some that are, you know, 35, 45 minutes on the top side. But overall, we're pretty darn fast.
Yeah, so come on now, Kevin, did you say every single app that's out there? Well, the truth is, before you go to the Java, I had a question come in. So, guy said, can we do multiple versions of Internet Explorer in a single base image? And we are a Microsoft BizSpark. We're actually a graduate now. And it's very interesting. One of the things we had to sign, because they had to look at our business plan in the accelerator, one of the things we had to sign, it's amazing, that exact thing, that we wouldn't try to violate the IE EULA. Now, other Microsoft apps, no problem. Can I do Access 2003 and you know, do Access 2016? Those actually, we're allowed to do those. Those would be fine. It is the Internet Explorers that are explicitly so.
I find that personally funny because wasn't there a lawsuit many years ago about Internet Explorer and I don't understand what their protection is of Internet Explorer. I just don't get it. But anyway, it
Yeah,
is what it is.
I don't need, it is what it is. But here's the thing though. So here's the other nice piece about being installed natively. Remember that one big conference we had in September where we'd meet with customers and the customer said, hey, I used your app Virt product and I virtualized our accounting package and everything worked fine until December. We actually found a bug in the accounting package and we called the company for support and they said, this doesn't look like our app. And they said, yeah, it doesn't because we virtualized it with AppVirt. And the company said, well, unvirtualize it and call us back if you still get the bug. In this situation, you're running native with FSLogix. All your apps are running native, so they run at native speeds as well.
No hit on the coming in and out of the bubble, as we used to call it, which is
Yeah.
overall for your infrastructure is good. The coming in and out of that bubble may be negligible, but as you add that together for hundreds and hundreds of users, it starts to tally up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
Kevin, let's
then,
talk. Go ahead, one more, and then we'll talk about a
no,
little
no, no, no,
Java.
no. I know where you're going next. Come on, talk to me about Java. How can you possibly isolate Javas from each other? They're based on URLs.
Yeah, so the cool part is we've got some technology where we can actually direct, I guess that's the right term I want to use, a user the appropriate version of Java based on the URL or the application they use. And that gives us an ability to kind of address a huge security issue that most organizations worry about. When I put my security hat on and I look at old versions of Java, I just want to say, nope, not allowed to be run. But the reality of that is companies have spent a lot of money, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars, building these Java apps that they just can't retire because Dave Young put his security hat on and said those are no good anymore, right? So as we start to look at that, the ability to specifically say Java version, we'll use 1.1 for an example, is allowed to be used with application whatever, is an okay thing because we trust application whatever. We know who wrote it, we know where they live, et cetera, et cetera. And then to go out and say, hey, I've got another version of Java, right, that I need to support for a different website or app and tie it down to that specific location gives us a different approach on our security. Now we can say by default the latest and greatest version of Java that's secure is what we want to use. But for these one-off exceptions, we're allowed to say go ahead and let that work because we do trust that one-off exception. There's an agency down in Texas that does entitlements of things, and they have to go check about 30 different websites to make sure that their customer is entitled to this particular thing. And all 30 of those different websites are written in a different version of Java, depending on where that county is or where that piece of the state of Texas is in their upgrade path. And that presents a huge risk to IT. We can't have machines, for every website we need to go to or application we go to with the appropriate version of Java. We need to do something cool. And this gives us the ability to do that redirection to the appropriate version of Java for the end user. You want to add anything to that, Kevin?
Yeah, a couple of questions are coming in about that. So, can you redirect different URLs to different JRE plugins? And the answer is that. The one question is, and we may have to go and get the technical dudes in on this one. I may have to ask engineering about this and get back to this person. So he said, what if the user's in IE, goes to a particular URL, and that is tagged to work with Chrome? Could we redirect them to the Chrome app instead? And I just have not seen that before, so I don't know the answer to it. It's possible, but I'm guessing me. I don't know. We'll find out for you and be able to get back to you after the session on that one.
If whoever asked that question wants to just make an email to sales@fslogix.com, we'll throw it in the queue and run it around, see what we can get for an answer. That sounds like a challenge that our CTO would love to have. We know how much he likes his challenges, trying to do things that are impossible. So just send us a note on that, and we'll toss that around, see what he comes up with.
Yeah. All right. Perfect, Dave. Yeah. So I think we talked about a lot of this, but let's be explicit and go through some very, very specific examples of how we improve native performance. I think I talked about native versus advert, right?
Yep, I think we've got that. We're not in the bubble. We're using what is naturally installed, so there's no layers in between us. And all we're doing is, masking or unmasking the application from the user's view. Don't violate any licensing agreements because if the user can't see it, they can't run it, right? So I think we've covered that. Folder redirection versus FSLogix on how we do it. Because we're not reading the entire file, Our I/O is going to be reduced, right, because we're only reading the pieces that we actually need. Our CPU is going to be reduced because I don't have to process that 108 meg file across the network. And what does it do to search, right? So search is one of those cool things, and we'll talk about that a little bit just so we can make sure everybody understands. We have the capability to take the search database when it's in single user mode and persist that to the user session. So we basically capture that, add it as part of their profile or as part of their Office OST, and we keep that search database. So when they go from machine to machine to machine, all that indexing that was done on folders, on the OST, et cetera, is persisted to the user. Now, I want to make sure I make a caveat here that is only single user mode. Okay, so all your Windows Workstation versions, you can do it on server as long as you're using it in single user mode. Once you start to do it in multi-user mode, there's things in the universe that start to go strange. So we don't want to do that at the moment. But single user mode, we can definitely take your search and reduce that I/O and that CPU hit that we get when we do search. And that impacts our density, right, Kevin? I mean, as long as I've been in this, IT's been pushing for higher density, right? We want to get more users on the infrastructure so we can optimize that cost.
Yeah, so here's the thing about session density, and people always ask me how does that work? And one of the ways is that, imagine you're on your own laptop and you had 40 apps open, you notice it started getting sluggish, you might close a few apps, you know? That's how it is with sense and density when you're using folder redirection, only you're not in charge of it, unfortunately, right? The more people that are using that folder that you're on with folder redirection, the slower your application start times are, and the slower your logins are if there's a login storm and the like. But if that was all seamless and acted like it was local, then you'd be able to actually put more users on the server, so they wouldn't impact that.
And should we talk a little bit about profiles and login times? I know we've got it on here, and I think there's a big reason why. Didn't you give me a homework assignment a couple months ago?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think I asked you to use a third-party tool so that people couldn't say, "Oh, we were doing the numbers." Yeah, why don't you go into that?
Yeah, so Kevin challenged me to prove the numbers, right? We wanted real data between a traditional login and an FSLogix login. And it sounds like a very simple thing to do, but I actually had to spend a couple weeks undoing best practices that had been ingrained into my mind for years and years and years, right? So one of the things I did is I created two machines, and just to kind of give you a background on this environment, it was the identical infrastructure, the actual desktops are identical, and the data is identical. So every block of data that was used in this analysis was actually written via script. So if I had an Excel spreadsheet, I had the same exact Excel spreadsheet in the other user's profile, right? So as we started doing the analysis, we did it with Uber Agent. Pretty cool stuff came out of it, right? Well, the biggest thing was I took logins from 42.98 seconds using traditional roaming profiles and folder redirection down to 7.78 seconds. And if you're not saying, wow, let me show you a little bit of what allowed us to get to that point. And it was pretty cool. What we found out was that the user profile in a traditional login was a big hitter. In this particular analysis here, it was 20 seconds of the actual entire login. Group policy was about 16, 17 seconds. And then you got this shell start. And shell start's kind of a constant, right? You're going to pay the Microsoft tax to start that OS no matter what happens. And that's the shell start. And then you can see we had our group policy login scripts. I didn't have a whole lot of scripts going. But those are the big three hitters. When I replaced roaming profiles and folder redirection with FSLogix profiles, this is what we see. Notice shell start, still right out around 6 seconds, right? My group policy, sub 2 seconds, and my user profile load, sub 1 second. So when we start to look at that change, just by implementing one thing differently, right? Fetch and retrieve turned into folder interception, right? We were able to take that identical login down to 7.78 seconds. And that is doing this study was pretty cool. It gave us the data to be able to say, hey, these are the things that we eliminate, and this is how we make your world better. And the analysis on that, if you look at the green line, right, very consistent, very slow uprise. If you look at that red line, that kind of changes from 10 seconds to 16 seconds across the board. Now you can see we've got some big spikes in there, and that was as we went through iterations of heavy login, right? And that big green and that big red spike was when I actually locked up pretty much the entire environment. I had to power cycle a couple of machines in order to get access back into it. I turned the knob a little too far to the right. But as we look at that, that gives us the ability to go through and actually size based off of scientific data, not gut feel, which is what a lot of us had to do in the past, right? We don't know how long all that folder read's going to take because it all varies based on how many people are logging in, right? Kevin, the CEO of the company, have you put out a policy yet that says Dave has to log in at 8:01 and so gets to log in at 8:05 and not to violate that?
Yeah, 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 right.
Yeah, coming through the turnstile, log in, right? So as we look at that, being able to get that consistent data, right, performance is huge. And with the FSLogix VHD solution, whether it was with OSTs or with profiles, we're able to change that data path, going from fetch and retrieve to block level folder interception is what we get to do. So it's pretty cool on what it does to our environment. It takes a lot of that guesswork out of it and gives us the ability to size something appropriately so that we can actually have good user performance no matter what time they log in and not have to blame it on, oh, it's 8 o'clock, it's the login storm. So with that, Kevin, I think we're at the Q&A point. I know
Yeah,
Brandon's
yeah,
been taking some
you
notes
can
and you've been
answer.
taking some notes, so go for it.
Yeah, we took some questions early we're answering. Let's see if there's any more that comes in. Well, I'm waiting to see if there's any more questions coming in. I do want to say one of the things that's not evident from this, and maybe that's our next lab project, is your application start times are going to be so much faster as well if those applications were previously, like your Excel file was over on folder redirection. Double clicking that on your redirected desktop and getting that to come up is going to be so much faster than it would have been. Consequently, your Outlook, when you're doing your 365 stuff, is going to be so much faster than it would have been. So you see both an increase in session density, but also users are quite happy with how peppy their Outlook is. Questions? Yeah, are there any questions come in?
Yeah. So one of them is what environments are supported?
Yeah, hey, good question. So we work FSLogix knows about Windows, right? So all it knows about is, are you Windows 2008 and above, so 12 and 2016? Are you Windows 7, 8.1, or Windows 10? And that we're hypervisor agnostic, so you could be on VMware or Microsoft. We
And
are
we're
compatible.
virtualization agnostic too, right, Kevin? We don't even have to be on a virtual platform. We can be on physical if we needed to.
Yeah, if we needed to. One customer asked explicitly, do we support Zen Desktop 7.6? Absolutely. And all versions of Zen Desktop. And we work best with a version of PVS that came out in ZenApp 5. So somewhere after that, any of the 64-bit stuff on PVS we work best on. And we are known to support, and this customer actually asked AppSense, hey, I have AppSense, and the last thing I'm going to do is rip and replace AppSense. Can I use Office 365 on top of it? And yeah, all versions of AppSense 8.x we support. Any other questions, Brandon, that I missed?
Yeah. So can you support multiple profiles?
Hey, good question. So by multiple profile, I assume the questioner is meaning, let's say I have a support mailbox on Office 365, and I have 3 different shifts come in and support that mailbox, which would mean 3 different OST files. Yeah, and the answer is absolutely yes, we do. So multiple people could log into, say, the support mailbox. The other question, could take it the other way, probably, couldn't I? What if I have Citrix XenApp desktop, but also an Outlook published app. So I use XenApp during the day, and then I have a published app that I go to at night. That's actually two separate sessions. And the answer is, yeah, we would support that as well. So you could log in as you two times, multi-session login, I think they call that, and you'd be able to support both or all sessions.
And if we do some really fancy stuff, we could do concurrent sessions, um, especially around the OST side of it, because we have the cool ability to decide where we want to put a difference file. So I can put the main OST VHD network and specify that the difference disk that we want to utilize is on the local machine, right? Or on another drive on the machine. And that gives us the ability to allow last writer to win, and then Outlook itself or Exchange is going to resolve any conflicts on last writer wins. So if I'm on my desktop and I've got mail open, and I'm on my XenApp server and I have mail open, when those merge together, Exchange is going to say, hey, there's another file here, another email here that he deleted. Let me get rid of that for you and bring everything up into concurrence. So a lot of cool things that we can do in that regards.
Thanks, Dave. So can you also support enhanced protected mode?
Oh boy, that's a great question, isn't it?
All right, so this is more, someone's asking more on the profile side. So for all the Office 360, no, I guess it's Outlook, right? So
Can be Outlook too.
yeah, of course. So Outlook is got downloads, attachments, let's say, of PDF files or other Office files. On your laptop, when you download those go into a section of your profile that is, they're called low integrity files. And those files right there, we know there's some other competition out there that's trying to do this that does not support that. Microsoft's UPD, for example, doesn't support low integrity files. Yes, we support enhanced protected mode, and honestly, if you're going to do Office 365 implementation, that's one of the first questions you want to ask, and yes, we do.
Yeah, and there's other components of Office 365 that require that. I don't know if anybody's tried to install OneDrive or configure OneDrive on a network share. It'll make you lose your hair, trust me, I did. And it just won't, it doesn't matter how you try and trick it, it just won't do it. They intentionally have done that. They don't want it installed on a network share. So as we start to think about those things, being able to handle that is a very important thing.
Excellent, excellent.
So how well does FSLogix scale then?
So,
Kevin, this is a good question, because we get this all the time, and apparently you and I got to do some work on that, because we think it's like a no-brainer. There's point A, where you install the driver, right? And then there's point B, where do you want to put the data. We don't require any infrastructure in between, right? Which is huge, right? So scaling, I can run it out for 10 users or 10,000 users. It's gonna, your impact is gonna be on how many, Zen desktops can you spin up. That's gonna be the real impact.
Yeah, there's no single point of failure. There's no back-end database necessary. It's pretty easy to configure your Office 365, Dave. It's just a bunch of GPOs, right?
Yeah, it's GPOs, and you can use them in different variations, and change your settings based on what kind of users you have in. It's pretty darn simple. A lot of our customers, I had one customer, he did a pilot, he forgot it was in play, right? And his license key expired during his pilot. And that took us a couple hours to figure out, because he insisted we just started this last week, but the reality was it had been a lot longer. But it's kind of interesting. He just kind of set it and forget it, and was off letting users do things, and hadn't circled back to that portion of the eval because there was no problems. And this was the same customer that was having corruption at multiple different levels in their profile and in these OSTs. And one of the cool things he saw by going to block level was, hey, now if your instance gets terminated unexpectedly, we're not talking about a corrupt file, we're talking about a crash consistent state in that data, right? So whatever blocks were written were what are written, right? So he saw a lot less profile or OST corruption in that environment, which was a great thing for him because that was one of the major things that was eating up their support queue.
Hey, you were talking about that eval. How can customers get an eval? Do we have a free trial available?
We do, and the easiest way for them to get that is to go to sales@fslogix.com, send us a note, and one of our great salespeople will respond to you. We'll even help you get it set up if you need us to. When we built both products, we kept to we'll keep it clean, a big easy button, right? Kevin many times says, Dave, this has got to be easy, right? So it is fairly simple. Generally, I can get a customer through an installation and trained on how to troubleshoot it and off into piloting in less than an hour. Okay, the actual installation and configuration takes about 3 minutes, but there's a lot of training that we like to do just to teach you how to troubleshoot and make sure that you understand what you got here so that when you go off to start testing, you know how to look into problems and things like that. So, less than an hour, send us a note. We'd be happy to help you out. We enjoy seeing all these new environments, and it's a lot of fun sometimes building these different solutions for different folks.
Excellent. Hey, any more questions come in, Brandon?
Yeah, it looks like we can take one more. So one person is asking, how much is this going to cost to fix the Office 365 issues?
So in general, we've priced this to be about 10% of what you're spending on your Office 365 subscription. Give us a give us a call, contact us at sales@FSLogix, and we give you details about your environment. Of course, we offer nice discounts for charities and nonprofits and the like. But yeah, in general, it's going to be about 10% of what you're. So if you're in a bind, if you didn't realize you were going to get all these troubles with your OST or your OneDrive for Business, and you're trying to roll out, you just go to your boss and say, hey, I got a fix for XenApp. It's we're going to run about 10% over, but I have a clear fix for us. So we've had that situation happen with lots of customers, and we've gotten them out of a bind there. We can do it for you too as well.
Yeah, my favorite email is that one you got, Kevin, where the guy said, my boss just bought 4,000 seats of Office 365, and I don't want to tell him it's not going to work.
Well, here's the problem, right? You're trying to retire your Exchange servers, right? You want to get rid of them. And if you have one call center using XenApp, that means you still have to have Exchange up if you can't convert them to Office 365. And, that means you still have to have network connections, you still have to have Exchange administrators, you still have to have cool some air for the servers and stuff like that. So you really want to get that taken care of. And when I say 10%, I mean 10% of the budget you're spending on your Citrix users, not your entire organization. So it's really insignificant.
Well, Kevin, it's been a lot of fun. I think we've covered a lot of things. If there's no other questions, I'll let you close out for us, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you very much for spending the time with us. And as happens to me on every webinar, I get off the webinar and think of 3 more things to ask. Feel free to reach out to us at sales@fslogix.com. And for all of you who asked all those great questions, thank you very much. And the ones we didn't answer, we'll be following back up with you.
Awesome. Thank you all. Good day.